Today we're talking about My Brilliant Friend, Season 3, Episode 3, The Treatment. And this was an appropriately titled episode following the last. The treatment for said fever is to go home, confront your demons, and stop fighting where you're from. In this episode, we see a strong desire by Elena to take care of her friend. So the episode starts off exactly where it left off, with Elena by Lila's bedside. And Elena's verdict is that she can't go back to this factory because it's killing her slowly. But Pascal has something else to say about it. And the way he comes after Elena by basically saying, not everyone has the luxury of being a lady who cares more about their friend than the working class. And his logic is that Lila's role in exposing this factory is a lot more important than this little fever that she has that's clearly killing her. And Elena, in this episode, she's a lot more forceful, right? She's not taking a back seat. She's like, sir, she can't go back there. Get in your car and take me home. And she also instructs Enzo to keep this man away from Lila. And Lila's sickness basically gives Elena an opportunity to help her friend. She describes herself as having a terrible sense of power. And I think up until this point, she's always seen Lila as like the strong friend, as the brilliant friend. She attributes a lot of her success to Lila. Like, she would not be here today if it wasn't for Lila. And seeing her like so weak and so down is kind of her opportunity to return the favor, right? And prove like she can take care of her. And so she goes home and her mother is waiting for her, shaming her, following her around the apartment, saying, isn't it bad enough that you wrote a dirty book? Now you want to keep your dirty friend, you know? And Elena, again, she has connections and she's not afraid to use them. And the first phone call she makes to try and help her friend is to Pietro, her fiance. And he automatically gets Lila a lawyer. He's like, I think I know someone, and we're gonna get Enzo a job. Everything will be fine. And then she calls her fiance's mother, who I think she really respects. Like, she looks up to her as someone that she can't really live up to. And in this conversation, her Adele basically tells her, listen, you have to learn to take sides and you have to learn to write with intention. Like, you can't just beat around the bush, right? If you have something to say, if you want to help your friend, you have to go at them directly. And she gives her the number for this newspaper agency. And she says, okay, you want to help her? Go there. And so she's making these phone calls. And just before she goes over to this newspaper agency, she's sitting with her family. And her family, you know, so much has changed and nothing has changed, right? Her siblings have gotten older. And she's sitting comparing her old family to her new family. And she basically, you know, says she's about to enter this family that has more power, you know, more protection. And the way she talks about her new family is like a means to an end. You know, like, again, I don't think she wants to just be a housewife in a nicer house. And there is this kind of one foot out the door feeling I get from Elena. Like, although she respects her new family, she doesn't want to be engulfed by them. And so she goes over to this newspaper agency, and I think in helping Lila, she's also helping herself, because this place feels right, you know. And she goes in and automatically we notice that she's conservatively dressed in comparison to all these women. Like, you have men and women working side by side. Everyone's a comrade, right? The skirts are shorter. And she's looking around like, oh, this is awesome. And so this editor basically asks her, what is a successful writer? Like, why are you so interested in this? And she doesn't say anything, but she grabs the desks and she starts writing. And her reaction to being sort of assigned this desk, like, you could tell she was super happy, you know? Because she wasn't sure. Like, she wants to write another book, she wants to teach, but journalism is like in the middle, you know, like this kind of exciting space. And so she took off that jacket and she was right at home. So I think she found, you know, she's really onto something here. And so she finishes the article, she reads it to Lila, who's totally unimpressed. And Lila's logic is, you know, she's not sure Nadia and the communists would approve of this method. And Elena is a bit frustrated because, as far as she's concerned, these communists were willing to throw her under the bus. They didn't really care what happened to her. You know, she's the one there. She's the one booking doctor's appointments. So she could care less what Nadia and the gang think. And Elena is not taking no for an answer. She basically serves as her guardian angel throughout this episode. And she, like, what she says goes. And just before these doctor's appointments, Lila basically confesses, like, she wants to go home. She wants to go home, and, you know, conditions at this factory were so bad that at this point the neighborhood is more comfortable. And Elena tries her best to dissuade her, you know, basically telling her, listen, I don't know if this is the best place for you. And Lila basically says, listen, I'm not like you. And again, watching Elena's perception of Lila, like, change is really interesting, because Lila is basically opening up saying, listen, I know you think I'm the strong friend, you know, I know you think I'm the brilliant friend, but actually, girl, you're the strong friend, you're the brilliant friend. And that's the thing about the show, you don't actually know who the brilliant friend is, right? And Lila, you know, she kind of says, the further away you go, the more real you become, right? Like, you're a lot braver than you think you are, you know, and I'm not. Like, I want to go home. You know, I feel lost. And so Elena really makes it her business not to just make sure her friend is healthy, but she goes back to at least a safe environment. So we get to these doctor's appointments, and the best way to summarize these doctor's appointments is when Lila compares herself to a maid and Elena to a lady, right? Because Elena is so comfortable in these spaces. Like, they're talking to the doctors. She's chatting them up like they're old friends. Lila, on the other hand, is like questioning these doctors, right? She's playing an active role in her own healthcare. And that's not something that's common, right? And there's a reason for that. So we get to this first appointment, and the doctor prescribes her a tonic. He says, listen, your heart is fine, you need to rest. And then he kind of suggests other appointments, which trigger Lila, basically suggesting that she may have, like, mental health issues, or, like, there's other things we need to look into. And the perception of doctors at this time, especially towards women's health, was quite poor. And you see that with the second doctor, right? And again, Lila is taking a very active role. She's asking for what she wants. She's not just letting them diagnose her. So the second doctor, she makes it clear, I want the pill. And this doctor was like, no way I'm giving you this pill. The pill is only for married women. And that's true. Like, in a lot of cultures, the pill is, to this day, like, used to regulate periods. You know, it's not really something you're supposed to be using to control your sex life. And the pill is the only thing that women could use to control their bodies, right? Like, it was just like a huge development. And I think Lila says at one point, like, pregnancy kills, you know, has ruined lives. The pill is better. And throughout these doctor appointments, you see this draconian view of women's health, you know, this idea of hysteria, where, you know, she's not doing well, she needs to go home. Oh, she's sad, get pregnant. Oh, you know, you're not, you know, you're a little bit, you know, maybe you just need a man. Like, this very draconian, simple way of looking at, like, female anatomy and the female mind, you know, sadly went on for quite some time. And it explains why Lila is so mad at these doctors. And so this raggedy second doctor basically at least gave them the number for this lady doctor that would later prescribe them the pill. And he was so creepy. He was just like, yeah, I read your book to Elena. My wife really liked it. I was like, you're a weirdo. I was like, okay, weirdo. And so they leave, and then they have this whole conversation about the pill. And Lila wants the pill, again, if she's feeling healthy enough, she wants to go home. But she needs to control her body, or at least feel like she can. Whereas Elena has other plans for the pill, right? She's sitting here lecturing Lila about the pill, saying it's not candy. But we find out that Elena does not want to have kids right away. So her plan is to write a second book and then have children. And of course, her husband, or future husband, doesn't know that. So as we suspected, like, Elena is not, she doesn't want to be owned, right? Like, she wants some control over her body. And I thought it was super cute that neither one of them could decide who would ask this lady doctor for the pill. You know, like, they were both kind of like, okay, so who's gonna ask? So even like these topics, even with just like women by themselves, is weird. Like, especially if you come from a conservative family, like, you just wouldn't talk about this out loud, you know? And you see that with Elena and Lila. Like, they're both just like, So who's gonna do it? And so while they wait, they kind of have this very candid conversation. And this conversation between Lila and Elena is really interesting because, again, Elena has this idea of Lila as this strong, in control, person who knows themselves so well. And Lila's opening up like, girl, I'm just as lost as you. And the first thing that I think surprised Elena was the fact that Lila has never gained any pleasure from sex. She basically says that thing. So sex has never given her any pleasure. Like, she's tried, she's done everything anyone would want, and still like nothing, right? And, she kind of makes a comment about Elena's book, right? Kind of being like, well, girl, it seems like you've had the opposite experience. And Elena's face is like, first of all, you read my book, and second of all, you've really never experienced any pleasure. I think that was shocking to hear because, again, Lila just comes off as someone who's so in control. And Lila drops the bomb that Nino is the father of the baby, which we've kind of suspected that he was always a possible father. And she's kind of questioning herself. She's like, why is it I'm able to accept these scumbags but not Enzo? Not a nice man like Enzo. What is going on here? And Elena is just shocked, right? She basically says, listen, I'm so sorry you got pregnant without pleasure. And that line, like, sorry you got pregnant without pleasure, is so true, right? Like, nobody really cares if we experience pleasure. Like, a female pleasure, like a lot of what goes on in the bedroom, in terms of the dynamics between men and women is not really something that's talked about. Like, there's so much we don't know. And women's sexuality at that time was like a means to an end, right? Like, you're there to have babies and then make this guy happy. Like, you yourself are not supposed to experience pleasure, which is why in a lot of cultures they cut off the clitoris, right? Like, that's common in a lot of places because it's not supposed to be a pleasurable experience at all. Like, it's a function, it's a job, it's a duty. And so a lot of what Lila is describing, sadly, is true for so many people. And Elena is just sitting there. She's like, so you've never orgasmed? Like, she's just shook by this. And so I think this opens up a door. And she really takes on this sort of guardian angel role. And so this whole sequence of them just hanging out, they're by the beach. It's almost like a fresh start, like you can kind of inhale new air. The colors, everything around them, they're together again. You're back with your best friend. And they're kind of like empowering each other. And again, like the way this is shot is really beautiful. I love these scenes by the sea. Like, you feel like you're out in the open with them. Like, you're basking in the sun, right? So Lila kind of expressing herself again, they're like everything's out in the open. So in Lila opening up, Elena also opens up, and she pretty much admits what we all have suspected, which is that she's afraid of men, right? And she's afraid not of men necessarily, but of the idea of being owned by someone else. And she kind of goes on this monologue basically saying, they teach us how to act, dress, how to do everything, and they still criticize us, right? You have someone like Nino who had such a horrible father, and he still decided to be a scumbag, And she has a beautiful line at the end where she's like, they kind of do as they like, ruining lives and taking the color out of everything, right? Rendering life lifeless, And she's with her friend, and you see colors, and they're smiling and they're shining. And I think that's what Elena's afraid of, right? She's worked really hard to kind of find her footing. And the idea that this man could take it away, either intentionally or unintentionally, like having her boundaries violated, it's just not something that she's looking forward to. And so they finally meet this lady doctor, and this doctor ends up prescribing them the pill and explains, listen, the only way I can prescribe you this pill, again, is unless you're married or, you have some type of health issue. And she's like, listen, we'll make something up, and then I'll slip you the prescription. Like basically saying, this is not legal, but I got you. And I thought it was funny that Lila gave a fake name. Like she was just like, it's such a weird thing to ask for, right? You're just, like they're both sitting there like looking at each other, but also like super excited at the idea of taking this pill. It'd be interesting to see like how Elena takes this pill. Like, is she gonna tell him, or is she just gonna take it like on her own. Now that Lila is healthy, Elena needs to make sure that Lila is going back to a safe environment. And so she plays FBI this whole episode. Like, I loved it. Like, she was just going door to door being like, but like, do you have a problem with her? You know, like, she's really like looking, get yourself a friend like Elena. Like, she really had her back. You know, like, she really, like, again, although she tries to understand Lila, there's so much that she can never know about her friend, you know, but you don't really have to know someone fully to want to take care of them, you know, like, you can still take care of them. And so her first stop is the shoe store, right? And she has a conversation with this young man. His name kind of is slipping my mind at the moment, but, you know, he kind of makes the point, like, Stefano, Lila's ex-husband, the guy she separated from, he has bigger problems than Lila at the moment. And also, she doesn't really have to worry about him. And then he says something really interesting. He basically says, like, he's gay, and that if he were a girl, he would be exactly like Lila. And I'm not sure, I haven't read the books, but is it implied that Lila is interested in women? Because I don't know why that blew my mind. Like, it never actually occurred to me. But you guys let me know in the comment section for the people who have read the books. And so she leaves, and Elena, like, as soon as that was dropped, she just looked at this man like, he's what? Like, she's like, nah, that's not. Like, she just kind of left. Like, she didn't want to hear it. And her second stop is Gigiola. And this conversation she has with Gigiola was my favorite. You know, like, that was my favorite conversation. So we meet Gigiola. And she lives in this beautiful apartment, you know, she's wearing this beautiful dress, and she looks like she's winning. And then you realize she's married, or is marrying Michael. And Michael is pretty much as terrible as we imagine him to be. So the first time we see Gigiola, you know, she welcomes Elena in. And I thought it was interesting that she was opening up to Elena because of this book. Right? She says, the reason I'm talking to you is because you wrote this book and you know what suffering is. And this is interesting for Elena, especially if she wants to pursue journalism or something like that, because people feel really comfortable just talking to her, you know, and she takes it all in. You know, the first thing that Gigiola does is she's comparing lives, right? The first person she compares her life to is Elena, right? She's like, you studied, you did all these things, but look where I live. And Elena was quite humble. Right? She's not going to say, listen, I married a guy who has more money than all of you, and I'm moving to Florence. Like, she's like, no, yeah, it can take me a long time to save up for this place. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Elena's husband has way more money than Michael. And Gigiola doesn't pretend around Elena, right? She really opens up to her and tells her the state that she's in, right? She kind of says, listen, I'm sure your fiance, he's not like Michael. He does what you want. Whereas Michael is a monster. And watching Gigiola, it's interesting because, you know, you look at her life and it's picture perfect, right? Like, she has all the things and she looks, you know, like, she looks like she's living the life, but at what price? You know, is this worth it? And so many women make that compromise, you know, like, okay, well, at least I'm financially and socially secure, even though I'm unhappy. And that's basically what Gigiola is doing. Man is everybody's nightmare, including his fiance. The only reason he's marrying her is because he feels some obligation. And her view of marriage is interesting. She's basically like, the only reason men get married is to have like a loyal housewife, which I think is true in Michael's case. You know, he kind of berates her, he insults her sexually, he doesn't think much of her intellectually. Gigiola basically describes the fact that she's always alone in this house. And the only thing worse than being alone is being with this man. So a lot of the tension between Gigiola and Michael is the fact that Michael is in love with Lila, right? And this question comes up, it's like, could you marry somebody who's in love with someone else? And the answer is no, right? Like, for me, it's no. But for a lot of people, you know, it depends, right? And that's the position that Gigiola's in, right? And it's interesting comparing Lila and Gigiola, where Lila has, you know, her reputation is in the gutter, but at least she has the potential to be happy. Whereas Gigiola, you know, at face value, she looks amazing, but she's unhappy. And she basically says Michael is the last person that would ever hurt Lila because he loves her. Not only does he love her, he wants to take care of her. Apparently Michael has this image of Lila as someone that only he understands, only someone that he can like kind of take out from the depths of darkness. Like he has this image of Lila as someone that he can save. And Gigiola basically says the only reason that she has no hard feelings towards Lila is because she knows this man disgusts her. All this information. And, you know, in the end, the verdict is that Lila is safe to come back in the neighborhood. But man, like Gigiola's story was really heartbreaking. And it's quite common, you know. It's like, what are you willing to do to get married? Like, is it worth taking all this abuse just to look stable, you know? And stability is not just what it looks like, right? You don't know what goes on behind the scenes, right? You don't know, like this is a good example of what you see and what you get. You can never assume someone's sort of happiness or mental state based on what they look like and what they have. And Gigiola is a good example of that, right? She looks happy, but behind the scenes, it's a mess. And so Elena leaves this apartment and she has a few things to deal with. First is the repercussions of that article. Right, so Bruno calls her and says, you know what, these are all lies. And he kind of says like, listen girl, like the people making my life hard are the same people making your life hard, right? The people in the neighborhood. So you need to sort them out before you come after me. And so Elena's like, okay, this is a battle for another day. And I was impressed with Elena this episode because by the end of the episode, she gets Lila the money and Enzo gets a job or a job interview at IBM. And so the episode ends with them going back home. And watching them go back home is fascinating, right? So they're apartment hunting, they're going back to the old neighborhood, and it's going to be a rough transition, right? And the first person that Lila sort of approaches is her father. And this scene with her father was just horrifying. They get to the neighborhood and she sees her father and she wants to introduce, you know, her son. And you know, he doesn't even acknowledge that she's there. And then second, he calls her his own daughter, you know, what he calls her. And as they're walking away, he doesn't even look back, right? And granted, this is the same man who threw her out the window. Like, we shouldn't be that surprised. But man, like there is just, as far as Lila's family is concerned, she's dead to them. And this is true throughout the neighborhood, right? Like the people that they would kind of greet would only acknowledge Elena, but they would not acknowledge Lila, right? She was not there. She was a ghost. And Stefano, like, he basically tells Elena, like, listen, remember who your friends are. Like, we forgave you for this dirty book, but we can't forgive you for this. And there's a really funny scene where I think Antonio's mother is, I guess, Stefano's babysitter, like Stefano's children's babysitter. And she's like, oh my God, Lila, you look horrible. No wonder he left you. Like, she's just berating her. And Lila was like, you know, that's going to be me in 10 years. Like, she was basically like, I'm probably going to lose my mind soon enough. And again, these encounters were quite brutal, right? Because even Stefano, like, he's casually talking about this other woman and how they went to Florence, and Lila's not there. But in this scene, this I forget her name, this babysitter, basically makes the point that Lila's son and Stefano's daughter look alike. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Lila seemed very happy that her son could be Stefano, like the father could be Stefano. Like, she seemed relieved by that. And she could be relieved because, again, she could be relieved because, you know, if something happens to her, at least her son has a father that would take care of him. I'm not really sure, but she seemed super happy about it. So they get to this apartment, and this apartment was haunted. I mean, this apartment was terrifying. There was no color, there was no nothing. And I guess the impression is they're going to give it some color and they're going to give it some life. The apartment is positioned next to the tunnel. So there's kind of this 1 foot out the door. If they want to escape, they can run at any time. And Enzo says, we'll take it. And I have to say, Enzo, I don't know a lot of guys that would take on this position. Like, he's basically taking care of Lila, you know, the best he can. And not a lot of dudes would do this, right? Like, his role in her life is really interesting, because I'm not sure how it is in the book, but as I'm watching it, I'm like, he's really stepping in here. So I think my favorite scene was at the end when they're all sitting together, Elena, Lila, Enzo, and they're all just smiling, right? There's no burden in being back home. Like, they don't look they don't look like they're trying to leave, right? They look like, okay, finally things feel right, you know, like there's this kind of peace of mind to it instead of this kind of like embarrassment to it. And so that's how the episode ends. Overall, I thought it was amazing and very well done. The scenery, the way they shoot everything, like you really feel like you're out in the open with them, you know? So that's what I think. You guys let me know what you think. And